as we are gathered here today. So it is written that we shall someday be gathered on the banks of a mighty river that flows past the throne of God. The throne of the great God on high. Let's say hallelujah! Hallelujah! This prophecy comes to us in chapter 1, verse 22, book of Revelations, where it says, "And he showed unto me a river of life, pure as crystal, flowing out of the throne of God and of the Lamb." Say hallelujah! Hallelujah! Now, though you may not think of it, every drop of water is important to a mighty river, for without all those multitude of drops blending together to join into a mighty river, there would be no mighty river. So, just as it is important in water, so is it important in a river of song. I wish to hear every man's voice and every woman's voice and every spirit's voice lifted up here tonight, and join with us as we sing that grand old hymn, "Shall We Gather at the River?" Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Now the Lord has spoken to me concerning his master with the sweetheads here tonight, and he has told me that if I don't get personally every man, every woman, and every child to lift up their voices in praise of his glory, that he is going to call me home. Now, I'm ready, but you're not. You're not, otherwise you wouldn't need all these Tim and these Jammies and these Jerrys and these Billies. So, I want you to reach right down in the depths of your diaphragm and raise up your voices in that great old song, "Shall We Gather at the River?" Yes, we'll gather at the river, the beautiful river. Gather with the saints at the river that flows by the throne of God. Let's hum one and let Mason sing.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, a comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. And we can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, I want to bring on a guy who's opened me to a whole new portal in my existence as a radio broadcaster and on-the-road journalist. He really opened his heart and was able to enlighten me to the fact that, on top of the fact that he is an avant-garde composer, a brilliant classical composer, a guy who's worked with guys like John Cage, and he's done all sorts of improvisational music related to movement and gymnastics and working with so many different kinds of people. But he actually has been very involved with a cadre of people that I've always been fascinated with, which was the Merry Pranksters, more specifically Ken Kesey, and we just heard him playing piano on Shall We, well, he'll help me out with that title.
Shall we gather at the river?
Shall we gather at the river? And it is, I didn't get a chance to meet him face to face in Eugene, but I guess all good things in all good time. Art Maddox, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. I've enjoyed your work over the years, and I've particularly enjoyed your interview with Mason, which I just saw yesterday.
Thank you, sir. Well, we're going to do some cool stuff too. I wanted to start. I want to read a quote from Roger Kellaway, the pianist, and I want to get your feedback on it. He said, this is from a Facebook live interview I did with him last year. He said, Interdeterminacy was the name of the album. The concept was whatever John Cage was doing in his room, and whatever David Tudor was doing in his room, they couldn't hear each other. So you and I were listening to the result of what the two of them were doing in time and space. There was no post-production. We're the ones who got the results. you're dealing with two extremely creative people. Both of them have a sense of space. Maybe that's the answer. Of course, it could have turned out to be complete chaos. And so that was something fascinating about that, and that might have been later, but I did want you to talk about the first time you met John Cage, and then ultimately the conceptual upbringing of Satie's Socrate.
Okay, sure. I'd been a fan of Cage's for many years and read his books and so on, and heard recordings and knew about his career, doing music for Merce Cunningham and in the late 40s and so on, and later. Anyway, at LeJaron Hiller, who was the head of the electronic music studio at the University of Illinois, where I was going to grad school, he did a piece that was a collaboration with Cage, and I can't remember another composer, and it was called Harpsichord. It was short for harpsichord. If you take the word harpsichord and take out all the vowels, that was what it was. And it was quite a wonderful piece of improvisation with 7 different harpsichordists and famous ones, including David Tudor. And Cage, of course, came through for that. So he was there for a semester during that performance. I was involved peripherally, literally, in the performance, handling one of the bank of speakers up in it was in a big arena there, a sports arena. Anyway, so I got to know Cage a little bit, and one day he invited me over, and he had, back in the late 40s, he had begun to do a 2-piano arrangement of the Eric Satie's Socrate. And he had done just the first movement, and it had been choreographed and danced to by Merce. And anyway, Merce wanted to do the whole thing. So John asked me if I would finish doing that arrangement, and he gave me a copy, his own manuscript of the first movement to go by, because John had to leave and go out to one of the schools in California. I'm not sure which one, Davis, but he for the second semester of that year. So I said yes, of course. And Satie Socrate, the first movement is relatively short. I can't remember, 7, 8 minutes long. And then the succeeding movements, the 2 more movements, are each longer. And so it took me a while, but I based, what I was doing on John's original on his original version. And so I finally got it done. Xeroxed it, sent it out to him, and this was in 1969, by the way, in the spring. And anyway, we actually, he received it, and we had a little communication, but he was busy out there. So the first performance of it, now this was a performance just of the version that I had completed, was on the night of the moon landing in 1969. And we performed it at the end of a long concert we did there, and myself and Peter Takash on the pianos, and I had a friend who was improvising dancing, and a couple of French friends who were reciting parts of the words here and there. And anyway, so that, and then I knew that, then I heard from John that he had made some emendations to it, but I never saw what he did. And anyway, that was later, and then I would hear from him occasionally. For instance, it turned out that our version of Socrate couldn't be used because Socrate's only remaining relative, a nephew, I believe, refused to let our version be soon after, like a year after. The guy just, oh no, we can't have these these guys messing around with my uncle's music. So Merce had already scheduled it and choreographed to it, to this completed version. And Merce had to, anyway, he let John know that that it was not possible to use to use it. And so John had to come up with another piece of music which had the same rhythms and so on, because Merce had already choreographed to the entire piece. And his piece is called Cheap Imitation. And that's so talk about an involved history. And so that, anyway, Cheap Imitation is part of his oeuvre, and very, so like a brand new work that wouldn't have existed otherwise had Satie's nephew not been,
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, I just, for the audience listening out there, I pick up things like, the Non-Such Guide to Electronic Music, and that was from right around the time of the moon landing concert. But, I mean, can you just explain what was experimental about the music that you guys were pushing at that time?
I'm not sure by who you mean by you guys in general. Just in Chris, there was a lot of different activity, of course, across academia and sort of academia connected, but it also branched into free jazz and other things like that. But I can't nutshelize it at all, because there was a lot of variety going on.
Well, I mean, can you personalize it and just talk about your own evolution at
what I was doing at that time?
Well, I mean, also, did you know the drummer George Marsh?
George is a familiar name.
Yeah, he was there with, I'll have to look it up, but he was there, he was playing gigs, an amazingly great free drummer, played with Denny Zeitlin for a long time and the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood, but he was there at that time. In fact, he had a chance in college to back up people like Barbra Streisand, who would come through Champaign-Urbana. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, in today's world, you're given a book. Latarsky told me yesterday in our Facebook, you're given a book of Charlie Parker methodology, and then you have to learn that and how to play it in all 12 keys or something like that. But there's this inundation and saturation of material. How was the Academy different that allowed people like Maddox, Cage, or just in general, the early experimental composers? How did academia lend itself to increasing vocabulary in music?
Well, I think it spawned, to some degree, interested in expanding things. Certainly before I was around, but by the time I was floating through, and the availability on recordings of all sorts of 20th century and more avant-garde and Stravinsky and so on, and even Copland in this country, but just the broadening of horizons. And this was happening. It wasn't in every academic locale, but there were certainly hot spots, and it's hard to really, very difficult to roll this into any tidy.
Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. Don't worry, you're doing great, man. You're riffing on this. I'm just trying to get at the idea of I see these albums and it's it talks about electronic music. Were you experimenting with electronics for and what did that mean?
Absolutely.
In that day?
In those days, it was. I was at the University of Illinois, and a guy named LeJaren Hiller. We called him Jerry. Everybody called him Jerry, but Lejaren Hiller. And he was a brilliant guy. He was actually, his doctorate was in chemistry, I think, but he was very interested in music. And he and another fellow went there to grad school in 1963, and I was immediately attracted by, yeah, electronic music, what's that? So, of course, became part of the activity there, very, very much involved, and it was all over the place. It was there was a fellow there who did. They got money from, for instance, now I forgot the name. There's a electronic organ manufacturer that had just north of Champaign there that gave them some money for some research into new ways to create sound using electronic circuitry, and there was and so that was part of what was going on, and it was just connected to just about everything. And Hiller, Leger and Hiller had looked into the history a lot, and we had classes with him, and he talked about the history of far out music in general, and of course it did touch to some degree on jazz in the 20th century, but it was not mainly oriented. None of academia was oriented toward jazz in those days, really, and it was just anyway. That was a fantastic place there, very open to everything. And by the way, you mentioned George March. Yes, I did know George, but only glancingly. We never had any musical.
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, I want to go deeper into this. Two questions. What did your rig? I mean, when you think of electronic music today, I mean, you look at the ability to do these digital loops. You'll see upright bass players create a loop through digitization, and then they'll bow the bass, and so they'll have two different things going on at one time. But technology's advanced quite far. I mean, Callaway did a concert at a library in New York with Mel Lewis and Richard Davis, and he had recorded these electronic sounds, or just sounds in general, and put them in a Walkman, and he put the earphones on the guys, so they were listening to that while they were playing, maybe original jazz tunes. But I mean, what did that electronic expansion look like? What? Because it's nothing like it is today.
Nothing like no. Yeah, the Walkman, of course, has more computing power in it than any of the computers that we had access to in those days. No, that's an excellent question, because it was totally different. I'll tell you, a little bit later, in 1966 and 67, I had a Fulbright, and I was in Warsaw, Poland. Now, I knew of there was an electronic music studio that was part of the Polish radio there, and the director of it was a friend of Leger and Hiller's, Józef Patkowski. And so I applied for this Fulbright. It was a travel and exchange grant, and got it. And it was for 10 months, and then I increased it to another 10 months, and I learned how to drink in Polish really well. I didn't speak Polish. Wódka. Anyway, one of the things that was going on, and in those days, creating electronic music could be anything, but it also often just meant recording stuff and then editing it on tape using, splicing techniques, just to create things. And I remember I made a piece when I was there, and it was called, and it was a piece that used, late Beethoven. It used Rubinstein playing. It used some existing tapes and then some added electronic sounds and noises and so on. And the name of my piece was High-Low Joy Honk.
Did you? Is that a recorded piece?
It's not out there anywhere. Yeah, well, I have it here.
I might need to hear. I might need to hear that.
Well, I wish you could, but I don't think it's ever even been digitized from the tape. But High-Low Joy Honk, it might be available. Who knows? Truly, it was called. And what I liked about that title, which is so succinct, High-Low Joy Honk, in Polish, it comes out as Wysokie, niskie, trobienie z radości. It's just so much longer, you know. Anyway, that was delightful. So, and like I said, that was partly electronically generated sound, partly pre-recorded stuff that was cut up in pieces of tape, even words turned backwards and stuff like that. So it was totally open to the technology. It was the technology, of course, was the limitation of the time, and the technology today is just so very far beyond. It's hard for people to understand what it's like to actually make pieces out of taking a pre-recorded tape and cutting it up and rearranging those chunks.
I want to read you a couple of things here because I've done a deep dive into all music. This is the vibraphonist Mike Mainieri. I'm not sure if you know who that cat is, old school cat. He said, in 1965, Donald McDonald, drummer Warren Bernhardt, began looping. This is 65. They would sit, get high, and play a gig. They'd sit there for days going through tapes of gigs that we recorded, and we'd cut up these tapes. This would work with this would work with that. They turned out to be very interesting loops. While we were playing with Jeremy Steig, Jeremy would have a coloring sheet, and as we'd be playing, he would be drawing. Slowly, these beautiful drawings would just appear on a silk screen. We were experimenting early on when I used pickups on the bars of my vibraphone so I could go through wah-wah pedals and various other fuzz tones and loops. The question is, were you able to get together with a group of musicians, or was this done primarily in isolation, whether in Poland or in the States?
Oh, absolutely. No, we clumped together in various ways, and in fact, there was I have quite a wonderful recording somewhere, again, not yet digitized, from the university there, of various players and improvising and so on. And too bad that stuff hasn't been digitized at this point.
Let's make it a project, man. This is essential, dude. This is essential stuff.
Well, in Poland, one of the things that I got involved in, there was a book, famous book that had some by an American author that I got at the U.S. Embassy. It was when I was living in Warsaw, and Thomas Pynchon's novel V. I don't know if you know that.
Interesting. No, anyway, I don't know that.
It's got lyrics. It's got a bunch of musical stuff through it. People singing at different points in different styles and with different lyrics. And for some reason, I thought it was a kind of a very fantasy kind of novel, very, very interesting, very political in a lot of ways. And so I started, one of the things I did in Warsaw is I started setting all of those lyrics in the novel V to music, and in all different styles. And the style was described in the book as it went along, so I tried to adhere to that. And the very opening thing was something that some sailors were singing coming off of a ship, and so on. There are all sorts of things. There was a tango that was happening. It was in South Africa because the natives were uprising, as they will deserve to, of course, and the Boers had hidden away in a fortified castle, and all the white people were in the castle, but there was a gal there who did a tango, and she was a dominatrix. So it was pretty kinky stuff, Anyway, so I did that.
This is exactly what I crave. This is unbelievable.
Well, I took some of these down. There was hanging out. I had a favorite bar that had often had music, and I wrote them down and took them down and gave them to the band leader. Gave some parts, with the changes and the notation to them to play one or two. I don't know if that is to the point. but that was sort of like outside of the electronic studio thing.
Um,
Of course, Poland was in those days. It was still very much dominated by the USSR, and it was quite an experience being there in the middle '60s.
I just wanted to read this this is a drummer based out of Chicago, but he went to Champaign-Urbana. I'm just going to read off some of these names. You may or may not know them. One connection I had to George Marsh. It's a guy named Tom Radke. He said, one connection I had to George Marsh was Ronnie Elliston, the piano player. Ronnie came from downstate Illinois, and George was at Champaign-Urbana. There was something in the water there. It was George Marsh, Ron DeLore on saxophone, and a trumpet player and writer named Jamie Knapp. They eventually all moved to Chicago and started to do all this avant-garde, I guess, jazz. But going back to this professor you talked about, I can't remember his name offhand, but they were exploring historical free music. Some of it was jazz, but in my mind, the avant-garde stuff had not really, if anything, it was just percolating at that time in the early 60s. So what was the history of free music that you're, like the types of cats that you can point to that were playing free that your professor pointed to?
Gee, I don't think that the thing is that's all reliant on people. I think it was definitely mostly post World War II, but I can't believe that there were no people who experimented with such ideas before that, and in fact, even in the previous century, I'm sure that there were some. But I'm sorry, I can't give you any.
I mean, can you talk? So let's. Post World War II, we're talking like Cecil Taylor, Bird, those cats.
Well, yeah. Well, in general, just the idea that and the avant-garde Cage and many others who started questioning how much structure was music needed to be considered music, right?
I see. That's the killer line right there. That's the killer line. I love that. I mean, that's what it's about. How much structure is needed, and what did you? And at that time, it was structure. It was a structure as an assumption, or you could leave the head of the tune and.
Yeah, we're talking about scale structure or harmonic structure or structure in what sense, and what is structure. So it was a questioning, basically opening up the whole idea of what is music and how does it work and how can we do it? Because there were some extremely some versions of music that, as we all well know, that have been formalized over many centuries and got to a very high level of sophistication. I mean, J.S. Bach, for God's sake, and but there's more to musical communication. By the way, the interesting things about music we associate it with. There's music with lyrics, with words, and then there's just music without words. And to me, I'm always more interested in the second category because that's kind of real music in a sense. Words, I was just thinking earlier about if you strip the words away from the music, what do you end up with? How much music is left? And of course, in the periods of American pop music and 19th century, 20th century pop music, there are many tunes that we all recognize right away without the words. We just hear the melody and the rhythm and so on. But now we're in a period when you think about stripping the words away from the music, and there are some kinds of music that are very popular that if we strip the words away, there's not much there.
No, there's nothing there, and
there's certainly not melodically and rhythmically. There's something going, but in the middle of our quest, we're always in the middle of a quest.
Let me I just would like you to paint the picture. You were the USA team pianist for women's gymnastics, but the one I wanted to really focus on was 1976 to China after Mao's death. Can you talk about that experience?
I'd love to talk about that. We had been invited to China. Now, China had never had a major U.S. sports delegation since what do they call that? The revolution that had begun 7 or 8 years before then, when there was really a backlash of younger Chinese communists.
The Cultural Revolution, yeah.
Cultural Revolution, and of course, Mao. When that started, and Mao, it became part of his association. He had to. He could have been bounced, but not really, probably. Anyway, so we were there right after the '76 Olympics. We were there in San Francisco, getting ready to go over, and we were been talked to by we had State Department people there, trying to let us know what might happen, and then there was a huge flood that caused disastrous, and so the Chinese asked us to delay our visit. So then we were going to go again, and then in September, I believe it was, Mao was very ill, and then he died, and so they asked us again to delay. So it was finally October when we went, sometime latter part of October, maybe around the 20th. Anyway, so I knew we were going to be there for Halloween. Anyway, it was just incredible. So I took some Halloween stuff with us. Now, and we were in Beijing. We at a huge sports arena. We had our get-together with the Chinese team, and in those days there had been no Western music in China for, because of the Cultural Revolution. There had been nothing for several years. And I can't remember, the Boston Symphony went over and visited once, but I can't even remember if that was before then or after. Anyway, so here we are, this arena in the afternoon is completely filled with people. I'm sure people were taken from work to be here and make a good showing. Thousands of people, and they were all dressed the same. So you could not really tell male from female because they were all wearing the tunic, the Sun Yat-sen tunic, and the hat and so on. Well, the pianist for the Chinese team didn't have a pianist per se who actually played for routines, but there in Beijing there was a lady who was the pianist who played the opening march in, and it was very somber and serious and so on. So at gymnastics events, when there were two pianists, often we'd take turns back and forth. And so when it was my turn, then after the first event, men have 6 events and women 4. And after the first event, then you play music as the gymnasts march around to the next event. So I improvised a sort of lighthearted 6/8 kind of, maybe even a little silly kind of march. Something like that, right? So, and it was totally, couldn't have been more opposite to the very somber march that she had played to come in, and I heard these little tittering sounds in the, must have been 8,000 or 10,000 people at least there, and I found out later that at that time that was a sign of embarrassment. They had never heard that kind of music used in any public thing in recent years, in many years.
Well, I just want to be clear. Was it a verbal grunting, or was it actually like a tapping, or what was the response?
grunting at all. It was just
because you were playing something kind of bombastic and upbeat, and they were just totally shocked by that.
well, yeah, and silly and just fun, more fun. And yes, it was a shock to them to hear music that wasn't serious at a big public event. It was just a shock. Anyway, then our gymnasts came around. Of course, they had, I can't remember all the stuff that I played, but it was all over the place, from European classical to American pop, I think. I was trying to remember some of the things. Anyway, it was, and there was, jazz-oriented music and some pop, and this was they had not heard anything like this in years. And there was a fellow who was a liaison with us who came to our hotel, and an older fellow he had actually, I can't remember, I think he had received his education in England, and he spoke wonderful, British English, and thought he was probably part of their, connected to their State Department, whatever. Anyway, he told me later, he said, we're listening to your playing, and we find it very interesting.
Well, I want to be clear. What kind of amplification was there? I mean, considering they were not used to they weren't exactly equipped to. I mean, you go to Champaign-Urbana, you're playing stuff early '60s, kind of before loud rock and roll. But I mean, what was the amplification like in that facility? I mean, I can't imagine. I have to believe it was pretty antiquated.
No. Well, I mean, it wasn't. It was quite good. It was just a regular microphone and old, I'm sure, tube-type amplifiers and speakers, but they had been carefully positioned, as they were, in large spaces in those days, and it was not. The amplification was just fine.
Let me. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the regional sound of. I'm not sure what year you moved there to Eugene, but
73.
Okay, so that was the same year as Latar. Did you meet Latarsky right away?
Shortly after I knew of him, and I went, but I was very busy with the gymnasts when I first came there, so I didn't. My interaction with the local musicians was gradual and over a period of years because I was so busy traveling with the gymnasts and working at the academy.
Basically, though, in today's world, if you watch, I don't watch a lot of Olympic sports, but they basically have recorded music coming out of the sound system now, right? I mean, as opposed to having human beings.
Yes. I can tell you what the difference was.
Yes.
If you're interested.
Yeah.
After World War II, the Soviet Union dominated certain sports because they could, even though theoretically, the Olympics were all amateur, but they essentially had created professionals. They would test kids when they were very young and find out their physical abilities, and then they put them in special schools, and they would educate their gymnasts and other athletes, but raising them up and really putting a lot of effort in because they wanted to impress the world with how advanced they were athletically. And so a lot of relatively large amount of funding went into this, and they even, for instance, in the gymnastics competitions, when only one event was done to music, and that was women's floor exercise. Men's floor exercise did not use music. Anyway, they would actually send performing groups to play for the gymnasts at the European Championships and the World Championships and stuff like that. who could do that, and it gave them an unfair advantage, it was felt. So by the time I was involved, there was a rule had been instituted a few years before that only one instrument could be used, and so that instrument was usually piano, because piano was common and could cover so many different styles. There were a few exceptions, but nearly always piano. So by the time I came in, only one instrument could be used. They also, if there were a lot of teams at the Olympics that didn't have pianists, most of them didn't. So they would have tapes, and their music would be played that way. But the main contenders had pianists, maybe a dozen, and a lot of those from Eastern Europe. But then there was the USA and Canada and so on. And in '76, I was a pianist for the U.S. team, but I was also the pianist for the Canadian team, because a couple of the kids who were the highly ranked Canadians trained at the academy here in Eugene, Oregon, and so they had asked me to play for them as well.
Both of, or at least Jed Kesey was a phenomenal wrestler, and I'm trying to figure out the first time that you connected with Ken Kesey. Well,
that happened. I met Mason Williams. It was through Mason, and I met him because this was 1980. We did a big public performance here in Eugene. It was a fundraiser for the Gymnastics Academy, which was called the National Academy of Artistic Gymnastics, and the Eugene Symphony. And so we worked on it here. We had our gymnasts doing routines, group routines and solo routines, and I'd picked out music, and we had choreographed stuff for them to do. And so, and then as well as that, there was anyway, one of the routines was to classical gas. So, and I didn't even know that Mason lived here at that time. And so somebody suggested I go talk to him, and maybe he'd be part of it. And he did. I talked to him, and we became friends, and I also used a bunch more of his music in the second half of the program. Anyway, so he performed in that, and I conducted the Eugene Symphony, and he called his old friend Tommy Smothers. Tommy was a gymnast, which I didn't know, and so Tommy said, why don't you come out? I think you'll enjoy this, and it has the gymnastics thing, and it would be great for you to kind of be a spotter for the show, because this is all, it's a big show, and it's being pulled together at the last minute. Well, we don't have a lot of rehearsal at the last minute, put it that way. And Tommy came up, so it was great hanging out with Tommy and Mason and all that. So anyway, it was through Mason later. He said, well, let's go over. Ken Kesey is giving a talk somewhere at the university. And so that's when I met Ken. That must have been '81. And just he was such a nice guy, and he invited me to come out and visit them out at their country home. And they had a lot of friends that visited, and so I got to know lots of folks then. And, that was really terribly sad about Jed. He was on a trip up in southern Washington, and it was bad weather. It was in the winter, and the van they were in slid off the road, and he and another one of the wrestlers from the UO team was killed.
I interviewed Zane.
Zane, of course, is the younger brother.
Right. He was just talking about, Ken was telling the driver, the wheels are getting kind of bald on that vehicle. Ken was really worried about the bald tires, and sure enough, it just skidded right off. When you would go to Ken's house or just did you guys do a lot of informal collaboration?
Not a lot, but they had a piano, and sometimes I would play and this and that. But it was later when Ken and I really started collaborating. It had to do with a book of his called Demon Box was coming out, which is a collection of tour and do a few performances, and then a big performance in New York City at Town Hall, as a matter of fact. And so he said, well, here's a story. He said, I've often thought music would go well with this story. And it was a story by his grandmother had told him, and he retold it in his inimitable style. And the name of the story is Little Tricker the Squirrel Meets Big Double the Bear.
Okay, I just want to be clear before you go on. The Demon Box, he wrote that, and then when you took it out live, who was in that group?
Well, now, the first go-round, it was semi-improvised, and it was, golly, I'm blanking. Wonderful bass player, a African-American, a black guy from here that was a good friend of, oh, God, how can I...
How could you space this name right? It was Tom Bergeron on the gig?
No. Stephen Schuster.
Oh, my man, dude! I gotta send you that Schuster. Man. I love Schuster, man. Yeah, Schuster was on the gig.
Yeah, Schuster, and it was Schuster and me, and Arzenia Richardson, the bass player.
Whoa! Is that cat still? Is he still around?
The fourth member was Zane, because Kesey had created something he called the Thunder Machine. It looked like a big.
No, they used to bring it out at MacArthur Court for the Grateful Dead shows. I know it very well.
Oh, you know about that?
Oh yeah, you'd be banging hammers on that, and all sorts of crazy. Babs would plug his trombone into there. It was crazy looking.
Exactly, and it was used for sound effects or whatever, but the Thunder Machine. So Zane was doing sound effects in the Thunder Machine. And I was on the piano, and then Arsenia on bass, and Steve Schuster playing multi-wind instrument. But Ken and I had sat down and gone through the story in detail, and I came out with a version of it where things were underlined and notes added and stuff like this. And so we all had the story to follow and certain things to do at certain points. So it was semi-improvised, but structurally it was pretty well put to bed. And that was the version that we did. We did here, we did in one of the California schools, we did in Boulder, and so it was kind of a trip across the country and ultimately in Town Hall. So that was the first version. Then in Town Hall, Bill McLaughlin, who was then the conductor of the San Francisco Chamber Orchestra as well as the Eugene Symphony. But he heard it, and he came back to me with a commission to write it, to do it for chamber orchestra. And that's when it got translated into, regular notation and a score and all that later on.
That is...
And that was...
Go ahead.
And then we performed that with Ken first in San Francisco for the premiere, and Ken narrating, and me on piano, and Schuster and Arzenia, and then we performed it also with the Oregon Symphony in Portland, and then we performed it with the Kansas City Symphony. Bill McLaughlin was the conductor of Kansas City Symphony then, and then ultimately at Lincoln Center, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, in Tully Hall. And we
Alice Tully Hall, absolutely.
That was in December of '89, 3 performances, and it was quite. And then after our performances on that Sunday, we went in and recorded it, and it was syndicated on radio for a year or two or whatever. And then, but something else very interesting happened after we recorded it that afternoon. There was Ken had been invited to an event also somewhere at Lincoln. I forget the name of the hall. It's Lincoln Center anyway. And that was a preview of a new movie. It was Michael Moore's movie, we went. Ken invited me and my friend Annie Montgomery to go with him that afternoon to this movie. It was a preview of it, right, in New York. And so when we got there, well, Ken knew lots of people there, so he went off to chat with them, and Annie and I sat right on the front row, and immediately behind us was Spike Lee, and so I mean all these folks. And
wait, you said it was a Inconvenient Truth? Is that what it was?
I'm sorry.
What was the name of the Michael Moore film?
Oh, Roger and Me.
Oh, Roger and Me, unbelievable.
His first.
Yeah, the one about Flint, Michigan. That's unbelievable.
And General Motors and so on. And anyway, and so he spoke a little bit at the beginning, and then they showed the movie, and then at the end he talked and took questions or whatever. And on the way out, I stopped and talked to him a little bit. I said, well, a real nice guy anyway. Oh, yeah, when we were on our way in to this event, it was, oh, God, I forget the name of the theater that has a big outside area where you can have they had some wine and food to drink and whatever. And he, Roger, looked like a big disheveled, like a guy who just got off of night shift or something. And he was standing there next to a very dapper fellow, and they were taking pictures of the two of them. And I'm trying to remember the dapper fellow he was standing next to was this extremely wealthy fellow. Oh, he dated Liz Taylor later, famously. Oh gosh, it's escaping me. Anyway, it was so great seeing this, looks like I said, the rather dumpy-looking guy next to it.
You talking about Michael Moore or Roger?
Michael Moore.
Yeah, Michael Moore. But yeah, okay, of course he was the. That's.
I didn't know when we went in. I didn't know who he was, but he and this very natty fellow were being photographed, obviously by for comparison, I suppose. So this was before the showing of the movie, but that was going in, and oh God, I'm trying to remember. Famous, very wealthy man of the time, 89. And anyway, afterward, I asked Michael, what did Roger have to say when you showed him this movie? No, what did this guy, not Roger, I'm sorry, the fellow, this wealthy man who had been photographed with before the show, said, what did he have to say about did he like the movie? And he said, well, I asked him, and he said, well, what can I say? Roger is a friend of mine.
Is the guy's name Dennis Stein?
No. Somebody.
Anthony Geary? Anthony Geary?
I'm sorry?
Anthony Geary?
No. More well-known name than that. He was a fellow. He even Liz Taylor. They even had a little fling. And,
well, no. If it comes to you, let me know. But I guess when in that Trick or the Squirrel, Double the Bear, that song lent itself to music. But did other songs in the Demon Box lend themselves to music?
Well, it wasn't a song per se. It was a story.
That's what I meant. Did other stories lend themselves to music?
Not that so much, but Ken and I did. We talked about. There was one of my tunes that I'd written that had no lyrics at all, and he started writing lyrics for it, and it was, but they never got finished. I have them partially completed somewhere, but his lyrics were about Adelaide, Australia, which was a jumping-off point, for World War II. That was one of the places where troops would congregate, and then they would send them on to wherever. And he started writing lyrics having to do with that. But and I can't remember what other musical. Well, but I did, I did play for him and improvise at other events. And there was he did something called Twister, which was kind of a takeoff on the famous Judy Garland.
Yeah, no, George Walker was in that. He played the Tin Man, I think, or I forget what that was about.
Exactly. So I was involved musically in that one, and Anyway, he was a great friend, and Schuster and I played at his funeral, as a matter of fact, and then and we called Mason because Ken had done many shows with Mason and me and the band, and he was that show was called Of Time and Rivers Flowing, the name of the show taken from a title of a tune by Pete Seeger, and it was all about rivers and water, and it was an environmentally important, very important show for its time, and Ken had some bits in that show, and he'd come out and do things. So that thing you played at the very beginning, that was part of that show, by the way. That old Baptist hymn, "Shall We Gather at the River," with Ken doing it as the Reverend. I forget what.
No. I transcribed that interview, part of that interview with Mason, and he said, "I want you to be the preacher. I'm going to call you Ken, for God's sakes, Kesey."
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Ken, for God's sakes.
Well, listen, Art, I got another guest coming on. We just cooked for 58 minutes, and I guess we'll have to definitely do a part two, man. It was such a great ball to talk to you, man.
I was just been so lucky in my life to be involved in so many different kinds of music, and I just never became a limited specialist in any one area. But that's what has made life so much fun. I think I told you the other day, I think of myself as on the outside looking out and on the inside looking in.
Fair enough, man. It was great to hang, dude. I'll get you a copy of this later on.
Okay, cool. Hey, Jake, thank you so much. It's great talking to you.
Great hang, man. Always, dude. We'll do it again.
All righty.
All right, cheers, man.
Yeah.
Bye. Legendary composer, avant-garde pianist, Art Maddox, and we will be back with Roy Blumenfeld on the other side right after this.